Good morning, spiritual companions. We are reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, continuing the introduction on page 25, Haladhari. In 1858, there came to Dakshineswar a cousin of Sri Ramakrishna, Haladhari by name, who was to remain there about 8 years. On account of Sri Ramakrishna's indifferent health, Mathur appointed this man to the office of priest in the Kali temple. He was a complex character, versed in the letter of the scriptures, but hardly aware of their spirit. He loved to participate in hair-splitting theological discussions, and by the measure of his own erudition, he proceeded to gauge Sri Ramakrishna. An orthodox Brahmin, he thoroughly disapproved of his cousin's unorthodox actions, but he was not unimpressed by Sri Ramakrishna's purity of life, ecstatic love of God, and yearning for realization. One day, Haladhari upset Sri Ramakrishna with the statement that God is incomprehensible to the human mind. Sri Ramakrishna has described the great moment of doubt when he wondered whether his visions had really misled him. With sobs I prayed to the mother, "How canst thou have the heart to deceive me like this, because I am a fool?" A stream of tears flowed from my eyes. Shortly afterwards, I saw a volume of mist rising from the floor and filling the space before me. In the midst of it, there appeared a face with flowing beard, calm, highly expressive, and fair. Fixing its gaze steadily upon me, it said solemnly, "Remain in bhavamukta, on the borderline between absolute and relative consciousness." This it repeated 3 times, and then it slowly disappeared in the midst, which itself dissolved. This vision reassured me. A garbled report of Sri Ramakrishna's failing health, indifference to worldly life, and various abnormal actions reached Kamarpukur and filled his poor mother's heart with anguish. At her repeated request, he returned to his village for a change of air. But his boyhood friends did not interest him anymore. A divine fever was consuming him. He spent a great part of the day and night in one of the cremation grounds, in meditation. The place reminded him of the impermanence of the human body, of human hopes and achievements. It also reminded him of Kali, the goddess of destruction. Marriage and after. But in a few months his health showed an improvement, and he recovered to some extent his natural buoyancy of spirit. His happy mother was encouraged to think it might be a good time to arrange his marriage. The boy was now 23 years old. A wife would bring him back to earth, and she was delighted when her son welcomed her suggestion. No doubt seeing in it the finger of God, Ramakrishna himself indicated where the prospective bride was to be found. Saradamani, a little girl of 5, lived in the neighboring village of Jayambati. Even at this age, she had been praying to God to make her character as stainless and fragrant as the white tuberose. Looking at the full moon years later, she would say, "O God, there are dark spots even on the moon, but make my character spotless." It was she who was selected as the bride for Sri Ramakrishna. The marriage ceremony was duly performed. Such early marriage in India is in the nature of a betrothal, the marriage being consummated when the girl attains puberty. But Sri Ramakrishna and Saradamani never lived the usual life of a husband and wife. Sri Ramakrishna stayed at Kamarpukur about 1.5 years and then returned to Dakshineswar. Hardly had he entered the compound of the Kali temple when he found himself again in the whirlwind. His madness reappeared tenfold. The same meditation and prayer, the same ecstatic moods, the same burning sensation, the same weeping, the same sleeplessness, the same indifference to the body and the outside world, the same divine delirium. He subjected himself to fresh disciplines in order to eradicate greed and lust, the two great impediments to spiritual progress. With a rupee in one hand and some earth in the other, he would reflect on the comparative value of these two for the realization of God, and finding them equally worthless, he would toss them, with equal indifference, into the Ganges. Women he regarded as manifestations of the Divine Mother. Never even in a dream did he think of them otherwise. And to root out of his mind the idea of caste superiority, he cleaned at night the dirty places in a pariah's house with his long and neglected hair. When he would sit in meditation, birds would perch on his head and peck in his hair for grains of food. Snakes would crawl over his body, and neither would be aware of the other. Sleep left him altogether. Day and night, spiritual visions flitted before him. He saw the sannyasi who had previously killed sin in him again, coming out of his body, threatening to strike him with his trident if he did not concentrate on God. Or the same sannyasi would visit distant places, following a luminous path, and bring him reports of what was happening there. Sri Ramakrishna used to say later that in the case of an advanced devotee, the mind itself becomes the guru, living and moving like an embodied being. Rani Rasmani, the foundress of the temple garden, passed away in 1861. After her death, her son-in-law, Mathur, became the sole executor of the estate. He placed himself and his resources at Sri Ramakrishna's disposal and began to look after his physical comfort. Sri Ramakrishna later spoke of him as one of his 5 suppliers of stores appointed by the Divine Mother. Whenever a desire arose in his mind, Mathur fulfilled it without hesitation. The Brahmani. There came to Dakshineswar at this time a Brahmin woman who was to play an important part in Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual unfoldment. Born in East Bengal, she was an adept in the Tantric and Vaishnava methods of worship. She was slightly over 50 years of age, handsome and garbed in the orange robe of a Hindu nun. Her sole possessions were a few books and 2 pieces of wearing cloth. Sri Ramakrishna welcomed the visitor with great respect, described to her his experiences and visions, and told her of people's belief that these were symptoms of madness. She listened to him intently and said, "My son, everyone in this world is mad. Some are mad for money, some for creature comforts, some for name and fame, and you are mad for God." She assured him that he was passing through the almost unknown spiritual experience described in the scriptures as Mahadbhava, the most exalted rapture of divine love, which, she told him, manifests itself in a devotee through 19 physical symptoms, such as the shedding of tears, tremor of the body, horripilation, perspiration, and a sensation of burning. The Bhakti scriptures, she further told him, had recorded only 2 instances of the experience, namely those of Sri Radha and Sri Chaitanya. Very soon, a tender relationship sprang up between Sri Ramakrishna and the Brahmani, she looking upon him as the baby Krishna, and he upon her as mother. Day after day she watched his ecstasy during the kirtan and meditation, his samadhi, his mad yearning. She also recognized in him a power to transmit spiritually to others. Finally, she came to the conclusion that such spiritual manifestations were not possible for an ordinary devotee, not even for a highly developed soul. Only an incarnation of God was capable of them. She proclaimed openly that Sri Ramakrishna, like Sri Chaitanya, was an incarnation of God. When Sri Ramakrishna told Mathur what Brahmani said about him, Mathur shook his head in doubt. He was unwilling to accept him as an incarnation of God, an avatar comparable to Rama, Krishna, Buddha, and Chaitanya, though he admitted Sri Ramakrishna's extraordinary spirituality. Whereupon the Brahmani asked Mathur to arrange a conference of scholars to discuss the matter with her. He agreed to the proposal, and a meeting was arranged in the Nat Mandir in front of the Kali temple. Two famous pundits of the time were invited, Vaishnavacharan, the leader of the Vaishnava society, and Gauri. The first to arrive was Vaishnavachatan, with a distinguished company of scholars and devotees. The Brahmani, like a proud mother, proclaimed her view before him and supported it with quotations from the scriptures. As the pundits discussed the abstruse theological points, Sri Ramakrishna, perfectly indifferent to everything happening around them, sat in their midst like a child, immersed in his own thoughts, sometimes smiling, sometimes chewing a pinch of spices from a pouch, or again saying to Vaishnavacharan with a nudge, "Look here, sometimes I feel like this too." Presently, Vaishnavacharan declared himself in total agreement with the Brahmani's view. He said that Sri Ramakrishna had undoubtedly experienced Mahabhava, and that this was the certain sign of the rare manifestation of God in a man. The people assembled there, especially the officers of the temple garden, were struck dumb. Sri Ramakrishna said to Mathur, like a boy, "Just fancy, he says so too. Well, I am glad to learn that, after all, it is not a disease." When a few days later Pundit Gauri arrived, another meeting was held, and he agreed with the view of Brahmani and Vaishnavacharan. To Sri Ramakrishna's remark that Vaishnavacharan had declared him to be an avatar, Gauri replied, "Is that all he has to say about you? Then he has said very little. I am fully convinced that you are the fountain of spiritual power, only a small fraction of which descends on earth from time to time in the form of an incarnation." "Ah," said Sri Ramakrishna with a smile, "you seem to have quite outbid Vaishnavacharan in this matter. What have you found in me that makes you entertain such an idea?" Gauri said, "I feel it in my heart, and I have the scriptures on my side. I am ready to prove it to anyone who challenges me." "Well," Sri Ramakrishna said, "it is you who say so, but, believe me, I know nothing about it." Thus, the insane priest was, by verdict of the great scholars of the day, proclaimed a divine incarnation. His visions were not the result of an overheated brain. They had precedence in spiritual history. And how did the proclamation affect Sri Ramakrishna himself? He remained the simple child of the mother that he had been since the first day of his life. Years later, when two of his householder disciples openly spoke of him as a divine incarnation, and the matter was reported to him, he said with a touch of sarcasm, "Do they think they will enhance my glory that way? One of them is an actor on the stage and the other a physician. What do they know about incarnations? Why, years ago, pundits like Gauri and Vaishnavacharan declared me to be an avatar. They were great scholars and knew what they were saying, but that did not cause a ripple in my mind. Sri Ramakrishna was a learner all his life. He often used to quote a proverb to his disciples, "Friend, the longer I live, the more I learn." When the excitement created by the Brahmani's declaration was over, he set himself to the task of practicing spiritual disciplines according to the traditional methods laid down in the Tantra and Vaishnava scriptures. Hitherto, he had pursued his spiritual ideal according to the promptings of his own mind and heart. Now he accepted the Brahmani as his guru and set foot on the traditional highways. End of section. End of today's reading.